Watkins is a proud sponsor of this episode of Foods That Matter.
From Kurtco Media.
Foods That Matter is a podcast that transports the epicures, the foodies, and the adventurers to unique edges of the earth with legendary food archaeologist John Robert Sutton. Now, let's see where in the world John is today.
John Robert Sutton, the Matoria Valley, Greece. You know, having just come back from a crypto conference in Dubai and foregoing another one in Miami, there's a huge one coming up in Miami where thousands of people are. I wonder about humanity. There's just nobody here. You know, the excitement and the future are individuals coding on computers, inventing new currencies, excited about trading things online, which is noble, is amazing, but look at history, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the struggles that have occurred on top of these mountains. Look at the preservation of cultures after thousands of years getting to this point. And nobody's here. People aren't interested in this stuff anymore. Well, I am. And I'm going to continue to share some of these beautiful spots that I like, and I hope you do too. Hello, this is John. I just want to let you know out there that this next show is going to be in your face. It's going to be what you might consider controversial, but we do not. And you're going to learn something about chicken that is not meant to scare you, is not meant to turn you into a vegan, is not meant to make you not sleep at night. It's to show you for the very first time what is going out there. And how did we do it? Because the next guest, Matthew Wadiak, is a decades-long friend, and this trust I have and Foods That Matter have is going to bring out things that he would never talk about before. This is stuff that's just not known. It's not to be controversial and drive you into a fear mode. This is for your own education. And this is to give you the choices that are out there that really matters. You need to know this stuff. This is stuff your children should know. So without further ado, let's welcome Matthew Wadiak, the true expert in the chicken industry we know of today.
Coming up on the show.
The way that we think about chicken is the way that we think about farming. It's the way that we think about politics and who gets elected into office. It's the way that we think about global nutrition and food security. It's the way that we think of war and peace and how food can be transported amongst continents and nations. Those things dictate who we are as a society, who we are as a community, and that's all due to the humble chicken.
All right, well, here I am with Matthew Wadiak, old friend for many, many years. Matthew's career is just unbelievable when you take a look at him being a professional chef, working at Chez Panisse Culinary Institute of America, graduate, not only a chef, but also designing kitchens on yachts, to the founder of Blue Apron, which is a modern-day food delivery system that we know of today, launching the preeminent chicken company in the world.
I believe personally this is how we're going to feed the world, and it's the future of agriculture. Cook's Venture, it's a company that's willing to go out on a limb. This is an important step towards a model that's actually better for people, animals, the planet.
We're on the corner.
A system was designed and they pulled the trigger on it.
To doing just incredible other things today. So it's just such a privilege to meet Matt.
Hey there, John. Good to see you, man.
When you're looking at chicken, you see all of these buzzwords now. Really, what is the difference between a free-range chicken and an industrial chicken that's just sitting in a coop?
One of the biggest problems in the U.S. specifically, and internationally, the different words mean different things. So free range in Europe might mean that the chickens were actually allowed to go outside. Free range in the United States only means that these chickens were grown in a giant industrial barn, very conventionally. So the words in the U.S., organic, free range, antibiotic free, hormone free, these are all basically marketing words that don't really mean much.
Wow.
And unfortunately, all of those birds are grown almost identically. All of them are the same breed. An organic chicken and a conventional chicken are almost exactly the same in the U.S. And that has a lot to do with USDA regulations, bad policy, big business that's lobbied and spent huge amounts of money promoting agricultural funds and super PACs. And what the people that suffer are the consumers who are misled in packaging that might be green in color, but it's grown by the same companies and often in the same houses that grow the worst chicken in the world.
Wow. And so you hear these chickens that are in these coops that can't move, they can get all sorts of disease, so they are given antibiotics. Is that correct? And
yeah.
And if they're given antibiotics and we're eating that chicken, does that mean we have antibiotics in our system from eating the chicken?
We're in this world where we just, got out of COVID. We have nuclear threats. We have existential risks. We have software. We have artificial intelligence, all these things. One of the real biggest risks in the world is that there are microbes out there that are completely resistant to any treatment, and it spreads like wildfire. And the problem with the way we're treating animals with antibiotics is we're cultivating antibiotic resistance within the microbe of the animal, within the gut biome of the animal, meaning that these chickens have salmonella in their gut. By treating the animals, that salmonella can outlive the antibiotics as heavily as we treat them. And you're right, they give them antibiotics because they're so tightly packed in. They're raised in such unhealthy conditions, such filthy conditions, that they just pump them full of they don't pump them full of antibiotics. That's a misstatement. They put it in their water. They put it in their feed. We then eat that. So when you take a chicken home from the grocery store, that chicken has on it the microbes within the bird, the antibiotic resistant microbes. So you might touch that and touch your faucet or your face or your counter. No matter how hard you try, you're touching something that has those germs on it.
Yeah.
And that can then get into your body, into your system. It can get into your gut, into your stomach. And you might not even know it, but a couple years later, you might cut your finger. You might stub your toe and get a little cut on it. You might have a little infection. And those bacteria that are now in your gut can bubble up and propagate and grow. And when your doctor gives you a course of some kind of antibiotic, a penicillin or a doxycycline or whatever, now you're resistant to that. And you could actually die from that. So we've seen that antibiotic resistance due to secondary infections during COVID and other diseases are the secondary infections are in many cases the things that kills people because they're resistant to the drugs that are supposed to treat them.
Wow.
So it's really dangerous to continue to feed these animals this stuff.
So are there a whole bunch of different breeds of chicken, or really only a few?
So commercially speaking, there's really just one main breed. There's a few sub-breeds, but you'd really call modern chicken to be modern Cornish cross or industrial bred chicken. That's just specifically, it's a white, big bird. You've probably seen them on chicken commercials and stuff, and they're just meant to grow really, really fast. The problem with that is when those birds grow so fast, it's at a sacrifice to the flavor of the bird. So really, heritage and heirloom chickens are the ones you want to look for if you're shopping, because those are the ones that have the flavor. They grow slower. They have smaller muscle fibers. They don't grow so quickly. They're not so full of water, metabolically, and they just taste better. Everybody's cooked a steak or a piece of chicken and you put it on your plate and you cut into it and all the water comes out of the meat. And that has to do with, modern industrial farming and how much water these animals are absorbing versus slowly growing and creating really cultivated muscle fibers that then, when you cook them, taste better.
What's the economics of feeding a chicken, both from a cost standpoint and what are they eating? We have to eat a chicken, but we never think what they eat. And they're not eating it out in the wild naturally. They're being fed something. What is it?
The distinction between organic and, conventional chicken in America is what kind of feed that chicken ate. So if it was organic certified, of which we grow almost very, 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 very little organic certified feed for animals in America. It's almost all imported from Brazil and Eastern Europe and India, places like that, and usually falsified. You're buying a chicken that eats corn and soy, even if it's organic, and probably coming from a dubious source. The old saying, you are what you eat.
Yes.
You are what you eat eats. So it's that corn and soybeans that those birds eat that are really the fundamental problem with agriculture. And when you think about land for agriculture in America, it's growing. It's like 97% of agriculture is growing those kind of row crops. And that's actually a big problem, the consumers of that food and how that affects our health.
Do you see certain feed that makes a better chicken? Or is it all just the same type of feed in one bag?
It's a race to the bottom in terms of feed conversion for animals. So farmers and the industrial complex of chicken is always, thinking, how do I get 79-cent chicken on the grocery store shelf?
Yeah.
Well, I understand that we've got to feed a lot of people, but if it comes at the cost of our health and our environment and animal welfare, is there a price that's really too low? And would people pay, instead of 79 cents, $1 or $1.10 to have healthy land that doesn't have chemicals that's going into your food? So I think that's really ultimately the question is, can we feed animals better? And one point of clarification, that the word grass-fed and pasture-raised, grass-fed is really only applicable to cattle and hoofed animals like bulls and cows that have what's called a rumen, meaning that they can eat grass, they ferment that grass, and they turn that into simple carbohydrates that they can digest for muscle mass. Mm-hmm. Chickens are like people in that they're what's called a monogastric animal. They have one stomach, and they can't just eat grass. So if you put them out to pasture and just give them bugs and grass, a lot of people think that those chickens are going to be okay, like the wild chickens from thousands of years ago, or the ones that still live in the jungle. They're completely different kinds of animals, and it would be the equivalent of us just eating undressed lettuce. You have no calories, therefore you can't survive. You have no metabolic function. You can't grow. So these chickens do need to eat some feed. You can't just put them out on pasture. But we can grow the feed more responsibly. In terms of cattle, you can feed cattle just grass, and they can do well on that.
So you have Tyson and Cargill and all these large chicken producers where there's antibiotics in there and it's not so good for your health. Should you just avoid that at all costs? Will that do enough damage?
It would be naive to say everybody can go online and buy expensive meats. We still have food insecurity in our country. There's a lot of kids and there's a lot of families that struggle to eat every day. And I'd say for folks who are food insecure, we need to eat. We need to, first of all, have some kind of nourishment. But I'd say if you're of means that you can at all costs avoid, you should avoid them because they are bad for you. And supporting those companies continues to propagate the cycle of use of pharmaceuticals, use of petrochemicals, use of herbicides. Again, these are not, in my opinion, cancer-causing or dangerous foods. These are factually dangerous foods. There are study upon study upon study for now decades that show that the things that we're putting in our farms and in our soil are causing harm to us. And, by some estimations, rates of cancer by 2050 are going to grow by 70%. What does that say? Where is that coming from? It's coming from really two areas. It's coming from food and the things in our food and the abundance of plastics in our environment.
it's the plastics in our bodies, in our system. It's like just people drinking out of a plastic bottle. It's like there was a time when people were smoking cigarettes and they thought, oh, that was fine. And then the realization came that was horrible. When is the realization going to come that all those little plastics on the side of these plastic bottles are breaking up and going into your body?
Scientists at Columbia and Rutgers now say an average liter of bottled water contains nearly 250,000 particles of nanoplastics, each the fraction of the width of a human hair. There's been a wealth of research on larger microplastics, much of which end up in oceans, breaking down into tiny fragments.
Into our ocean, into our water, into our groundwater. John, you remember when we were riding around when we were kids, people were smoking in the car with the window up, but they weren't drinking out of plastic bottles, and people actually had less cancer back then.
Yes.
When we were exposed to those kind of, that smoking environment, which was everywhere.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that with lead in cars and smoking and all the bad things that people did, people had less cancer. And now we have plastic everywhere and these farming chemicals everywhere, and people are getting sicker. The unfortunate thing is, if you live in a food desert, the best thing you can do, and probably the best thing if you're living in a place that doesn't have access to great grocery store meats, is to go on with the age of the internet. And this goes back to my Blue Apron days. We now have the ability to buy food online and buy frozen meat and buy meat from respectable farms and small companies. And you don't have to go out and support the big Tysons and Purdue's of the world. You can buy your meat from a much more responsible business that isn't a mega corporation monopoly, that doesn't control genetics, that doesn't control negative feed, that doesn't control the use of pharmaceuticals and animals. And you can support a small farmer that's growing heritage or heirloom chickens the right way. And that's what folks should do if they live in a place that doesn't have a great grocery store, that doesn't have access to good quality foods, which is actually most of the country. So support those online retailers, pay a little bit more, it's worth it, and feed your family foods that you can, understand what's in them and also be happy to eat. One of the things that's great around the world that I think we have in certain parts of America, but is continuing to grow and can grow more, is our ability to celebrate our heritage and our anthropology through cooking together, through spending time in the kitchen, through preparing great foods, through making fruits and vegetables and meats that matter, that are delicious. And John, God, I've been all over the world with you. We've eaten great foods, and we come back to the States sometimes, and it's like, well, shoot, here I am in Sheboygan, and there's nothing good to eat. How do we improve that community?
Why is that here in the United States that you go to these areas, you can't get anything good?
I think a lot of heritages drive food around very old culture and around farming and agriculture. And in places that we have great agriculture in the U.S., you see more integration of cooking and food ingredients. But we're a very young country. It's funny. A lot of people think of Mexico and they think, oh, dusty Mexico, and Mexican food from restaurants. Mexican heritage is so rich. The food is so incredible. And it's just south of our border. There's a whole Spanish colonial influence of great food and great cooking and great anthropology around celebrating around the table. And for whatever reason, we tend to have in our country, like if you think about barbecue, for example, barbecue is a derivative of farming and agriculture in the deep South and the South, during the coming up of our country. And now a lot of folks are using conventional meats for barbecue, unfortunately, but the celebration of that kind of food and cooking is still there. I think we just have to get back to celebrating where food is coming from. And to do that, we need to provide access to great quality foods to more parts of our country through distribution channels that work. We have to make it easy for folks to buy this stuff, and business people need to do that. Investors need to invest in businesses and scale. Private equity and family offices need to invest in companies that empower distribution, because that's what allows entrepreneurs from a culinary background to grow businesses that make sense for normal American consumers. And unfortunately, the turnaround on how capital works in our country drives a lot of the paradigm of how we eat and how we cook.
Let's discuss this investment communities looking for a quick buck as opposed to a long-term strategy on food security, on farms, on these type of things.
There is a massive disconnect between the folks who have access to distribution of capital in our country and understanding supply chain in food. And if our country only has three things: the ability to trade, our ability to raise an army to defend ourselves, and our ability to produce food and export food as a means of wealth. These are like Thomas Paine, Wealth of Nations, going back to the founding fathers, right?
Yes.
And you think today about commerce and trade and how important food. What if we ran out of food today? What would happen to our country? We're living in one of the richest nations in the world. And by that, I mean, we have more glacial topsoil than almost anyone. That's the definition of wealth, is our ability to feed ourselves and export. And there are places around the world that don't have water, that can't grow grain, which grain feeds animals. Animals feed people. That's how it works. And for whatever reason, our capital society has overlooked what a valuable resource this is. There's not enough of an understanding and appreciation for agriculture. But in terms of agriculture, where things happen slowly, where you're talking about 10, 20 years to really convert soil into regenerated fertile land without having to use a lot of petrochemicals and fertilizers and all the crappy inputs that we don't want in our bodies.
Yes.
You need patient capital. You need to lose a little bit of money to make money. And we're not talking about $1 million, $2 million, $10 million. Investors need to invest hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into infrastructure and agriculture and be willing to make big bets on that. To do that, we need to, really go back to who understands agriculture in America. And I got to tell you, unfortunately, it's not the people running agriculture. It's not the USDA. It's not most of the people who are buying John Deere tractors and dumping on petrochemicals and spraying their fields. It's people who have worked in regenerative systems around the world, who understand how farming systems work and how to feed animals and how to grow crops and how to regenerate land in scale. So there is a big disconnect between capital communities, how returns are expected, and how folks, including myself, continue to invest in the food system in scale.
I was just recently at COP28 in United Arab Emirates and seeing all of these billions and billions of dollars going to new systems of energy, climate change and energy. But there was very little discussion on putting those resources into the future of feeding people, the desertification happening around the world, water being the new oil, the polluted water supplies, very little of that. It's like there's just this mass race to throw money at climate change when it comes to energy, but there's such a solution there for agriculture in and of itself.
Listen, I think fundamentally, we were talking about antibiotics earlier, right? John,
Yes.
Guess what percentage of antibiotics is used on animals versus people? It's over 60%. So that's, when you're talking about global economies, there's this big disconnect in pharmaceutical, right? 60%. What percentage of crop production is going to feed anything? We'll start with corn, our biggest national crop. What is the majority of corn in America grown for?
It's what goes in your gas tank.
It's ethanol, right?
Yeah.
It's to put in your tank of gas. And I just want folks to understand, the impact of how we create policy. Have you heard this thing that the world population is going to double by 2050? We've got to feed all these people, right?
Yeah.
So 60% of our biggest GDP crop is making ethanol.
It's not going to feed anybody.
It's not going to feed anyone. It's going to a super PAC to elect the next governor of Iowa or the next president. And
what do they have to spray on all those cornfields to keep the insects off of it?
You have to spray stuff made by big chemical factories. So and farmers are not making money. So who's interested in promoting ethanol? It's the input companies.
Yeah.
It's the companies making money selling fertilizer, selling Roundup. Those are the people that profit from the ethanol industry. So when the world population doubles, great. All we have to do is stop making fucking ethanol.
Yeah.
And we can feed twice as many people if we just used our land more appropriately, and we could have forests and grasslands and fields back. The problem with ethanol specifically from an energy standpoint it takes 1.1 liters to 1.2 liters of ethanol in energy to produce a liter of ethanol. So every time you make ethanol, you're using oil to make the ethanol. So it's an energy loss item it's entirely subsidized. The only ethanol that's actually productive is sugarcane ethanol. So corn ethanol is always losing energy. You're always losing energy every time you make it. So there's actually no point to make it other than these companies that profit from it.
Yeah, and you know what? It's purposely so confusing and so convoluted that in order for someone to really do a deep dive, it's too much for them. It's easier to watch football. It's easier to see what Taylor Swift is doing. People want to escape from all of that. Yeah. And if you really deep down into these things, it's almost like, oh my God, we're going there. Can you believe this? It's like insane. What do you think the biggest issue with supply chain is today? Is it the middleman is holding it up, the big corporations, distribution system?
I hate to say it because I'm such a patriot and advocate of American farming, but I think, many of the folks that I interact with in the food world live in a little bit of a bubble. And I will say, like, as a chef and a cook myself, someone who cooked all over the world, definitively cooks are partially to blame for the lack of knowledge. And, I think what we were talking about earlier, you're talking about people don't want to invest the energy as buyers. I think education is really the problem. Food buyers and cooks have a social responsibility to understanding where their stuff is coming from. And I talk to countless people who have the audacity to call themselves chefs, and they don't know what breed of animal they're serving. They don't know where their animal was killed. Animals are living creatures that we're eating for food, and they don't know how their animals were killed that they're feeding to their customers. To me, that's just an embarrassment. And I think that cooks need to hold a higher standard. Culinary schools, like the one I went to, need to hold a higher standard to their students. You should not be able to graduate from a culinary school with understanding how supply chain works and where foods come from and what are the foods of the world. And you should not be able to be a chef in a restaurant unless you understand those things. You should not be able to be a buyer for a supermarket unless you understand those things.
Today, things have changed so much with even after COVID. So many places went out of business, distribution companies, and now there's so many names that are hidden, and actually it's just one giant group. So you have, a company like Cargill. They don't want to put Cargill on the box, so they come up with all these other names to sound good. So people don't realize. With a
green package that says antibiotic-free, free range on it.
Which, how much of that can you honestly believe? And who's monitoring that? And who's going to punish them?
That's who.
You think you're going to sue Cargill? And are you kidding me?
You can't, the USDA can't litigate companies that it's empowering and supporting with subsidies.
Yeah, just remarkable. When I walked on your chicken farm that you had out there, and I saw all of those chickens flooding out onto the field, they were eating worms and they were eating bugs and they were eating, other proteins out there naturally and in the wild. How beneficial is that in the end to those birds?
It's very beneficial. I mean, look, even a small percentage of that kind of interaction with nature is good. It's good for the land, for one, because the animals getting down there and pecking and going through stuff aerates the soil. It promotes new growth. It fertilizes the soil, and then you rest it after a flock of chickens, and new stuff grows. It spreads seed. The chickens get a great benefit from a micronutrient perspective. Like if you just eat French fries and, garbage junk food, you would not be very healthy, but you eat a salad here and there and it dramatically helps your health. Animals are no different. Having some biological diversity from micronutrient standpoint is essential for animals. Having the ability to stretch, to jump, to flutter, to fly is great exercise, and that builds flavor in the muscle. So between that activity and the nutrition and the breed, feed, and environment, those are the factors that make up, welfare and better quality, meats that we, animals that we eat for meat. And, everything should be cultivated like that.
Absolutely. And what percentage of chickens sold are like the ones you just described?
Close to zero. Very, very, very far south of 1%.
So when you go to a market, you see different colored eggs, white, brown. You open them up. Some of the yolks, they say, if they're a certain color, they're better, they're not. Well, what's that all about?
I hate to say it, but everybody thinks that the color of the yolk these more orange yolks make better eggs. A lot of companies will feed their chicken something called Oraglow. It's again a chemical that makes the yolks more orange.
No.
Big thumbs down. Yeah.
No.
So they'll say pasture raised, this, that, whatever. It's chemical. It's mimicking nature. So there is some truth to the fact that if chickens are going out and pasture, their eggs will be more orange. But it's very hard to tell the difference between good and cheating. And I'll give you an interesting fact. If you have chickens at home and you feed your chickens spicy peppers, the eggs will be more orange or almost red.
Oh.
Spicy peppers. It's the capsaicin, the chemical in the pepper that makes and chickens can't taste spice with their beaks. So it just affects the yolk.
Matthew, why should we really care about the chickens we eat?
We should care about the chickens that we eat because chickens are the most eaten food in America. Chickens are the largest consumers of corn other than cattle in our country. And increasingly, in our world, chicken is the most expanding food to feed food insecure parts of the world. So the way that we think about chicken is the way that we think about farming. It's the way that we think about politics and who gets elected into office. It's the way that we think about global nutrition and food security. It's the way that we think of war and peace and how food can be transported amongst continents and nations. And those things dictate who we are as a society, who we are as a community. And that's all due to the humble chicken.
Matthew, it's always such a pleasure to see you again. And boy, it's going to be fun to see in another country here sooner than later.
It's a small planet we're on, John, and it's always great to see you in some corner of the world. Looking forward to it, buddy.
All the best.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Another Digestif. Tough episode today, John, but an important one.
Yes.
So important. I hope everyone made it to the end here. This is a really impactful episode for me already. If I wanted to first just ask you, how do you plan to take the info we learned today to make better decisions yourself?
It's a great question. I'm certainly, when I go to the grocery store, I am going to look at where the natural antibiotic-free, free-range chicken is. And if there's nothing there, I'm going to go online and order from farms that are nearby here and have that chicken delivered to me. I think it is critical that happens. Plus, just in general, be more aware. And now that I am aware, probably will not be ordering chicken from restaurants or places without knowing exactly where it comes from.
100%. And, I want to emphasize for those folks that are maybe having guilt on the decisions they've made in the past. Hey, the past is over. Just let's take this knowledge and move forward. I purchase meat online all the time. There's some great vendors out there. And of course, beyond, first choice should be your local brick and mortar shops if you have those in your town. I'll also just throw out, I love Butcher Box. A lot of people know about that one. I think I get some really good cuts and seed to table. Again, we know that price is not always doable for everyone, but it's...
Yeah, I educate a lot of food distributors and food importers about a lot of this stuff. And again, it really comes down, unfortunately, to price. I mean, it's kind of a race to the bottom for mass consumers. Look, I am open to have a really intelligent discussion when ready for owners of these distribution companies, for all the largest restaurant chains. All of this stuff is out there. It's just, don't be fearful of it. Have the discussion, and you'd be surprised what's available at not such a devastating price that you're going to lose all your customers. I think you really should see what is out there because it's waiting for you.
And, ultimately, like we said, this was not the happiest episode, but there was so much there was so much hope sprinkled in all throughout this. Do you
Of
feel
course.
hope about this?
Why do I have hope? Because you're listening to somebody that you might have perceived as being a little down and gloomy on it, but he has a solution for it. He's giving you solutions. He created a solution for it. So it's not like I'm not going to have people on the show giving you bad vibes and giving you horrible things without a solution, because that matters. So I know that the future is going to be better because there's people like Matthew out there changing it, putting hundreds of millions of dollars, changing these things for the better. Now it's just up to you to take all that information and go with it, run with it. Because at the end of the day, the older you get, your body's going to be happier. Your health insurance bill is going to be happier. You just will feel these effects of these things over time. So start now. And that's why I'm so hopeful, because we have a great audience. We have great guests that are going to tell you the hard truths and then give you a solution for it.
Yep. And with that, we thank you all for listening through to the end on this really important episode. And we know we're all going to be better after listening to it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, John. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Stay tuned. The executive producers of Foods That Matter are A.J. Mosley and Stuart Halpern. Editing by A.J. Mosley. Marketing by Katrin Skapurtis. Music by Jenny G. And I'm your host, John Sutton. And until our next journey, stay hungry.